but you also have this younger generation that's in power. They brought down 2 governments in 3 years. It's pretty impressive. And this is the generation of the future that I think they're going to cool their heels, retrench for the long term and try to figure out what they can get away with. But I can see Egyptian civil society rising again. I do think that the potential is strong, because whatever our stereotypes are of the Arab world and Muslims, I spent enough time in that part of the world to know that Arabs and Muslims don't like to be jailed, tortured, and killed for their political beliefs any more than white Christians do. And even though democracy, the form of democracy, can vary considerably on a country's culture and history and whatever, the desire for government transparency and social justice and political freedom is pretty universal. I would argue. Indeed, within Islam, there is kind of an implied social contract between the ruler and ruled. If people, and if you go back to the early caliphs and the Hadith, there are frequent references to the idea that obey me is only as long as my rule is just. If I do not obey God, you do not owe me obedience. There is that, and indeed, we're in the Arab world is mixed. I mean, if you look at Iran, going back to the tobacco strikes in the 1890s, the Constitutional Revolution, the downfall of the Shah, the Green Revolution. I mean, they have a great and strong history of this kind of resistance. But we've seen an autocratic regime. I mean, Suharto, he had more blood in his hands than Saddam. He was brought down in Indonesia, a nonviolent movement. What's his name? The general in Bangladesh in '81 was brought down. Gayoom in the Maldives, in Mali in 1991. The Traore regime, even Sudan, we think of the big basket case, General Aboud in '64 and General Numeri in '85 were brought down in massive civil war insurrections, leading to 4 years of democracy before, unfortunately, in both cases, the military came back in. But the Lebanese got rid of the Syrians after decades of effective occupation, through in the Cedar Revolution. So there's actually a very long and impressive history of unarmed resistance, and that's what's exciting about looking at this thing, because it is not region specific. It's not culturally or religious specific, and nor is it ideological. We've seen right-wing military hunters to communist regimes, monarchies. To autocratic republics, and left and right and center. They've all been vulnerable to this kind of resistance. But again, it's a fairly new area in terms of research and scholarship and understanding. I mean, we think of all the military academies. Think of all the strategic studies institutes that study war and why and how it works, and insurgency and counterinsurgency. How many institutes, do we have that look at this phenomenon seriously, which is quite remarkable, given, as I mentioned, it's been more widespread and more successful than armed struggle. I mean, I just want to mention that Fletcher is, even though you don't have a lot on this particular here, you produced a few PhDs. In fact, only a few, but proportionally, it's among the well represented the number of PhDs who've done work on this, and that's to your credit, because Fletcher's always been a little more innovative and cutting edge than most graduate programs of its kind. So I think that's a good reflection on you. Just briefly, I was talking to some people about this beforehand. I just want to mention that there's the ability of nonviolent movements to bring down dictators is pretty clear, but where a lot of the killing, a lot of the violence goes on, it's not between the regime and people. It's where there are competing armed groups, terrorists, warlords, drug lords, those who aren't interested in their don't care about popular support or international legitimacy. People who make their money through blood diamonds or whatever. So need foreign aid. And often it's coming. These are multi-sided conflicts. The term some of us use, we would call it fragmented tyrannies. Because again, it's not a centralized, tyrannical state. Nonviolent resistance in these situations is unquestionably more challenging. And yet, we have seen situations, like Liberia and Sierra Leone, where these women, led these movements against and successfully forced, through nonviolent resistance, forced the parties to negotiate an end to those wars. There's a remarkable documentary about that. The name escapes me. Do you remember the name of it?
Pray the Devil Back to Hell.
Yeah, Pray the Devil Back to Hell. It's amazing. It's called Pray the Devil Back to Hell. It's really powerful. Bring a tissue. It's really, it's quite amazing. And similarly, there's some small scale efforts that I've had the privilege to learn about in places like the Guatemalan Highlands, the Niger Delta, and most notably Colombia. Where a number of towns and villages have declared themselves peace zones, where everybody's agreed to resist any efforts of conscription by the guerrillas, by the government, by the paramilitaries, they've been remarkably successful. We've also had the phenomenon of third-party nonviolent intervention, peace teams of internationals who've come in. They played a major role in Guatemala, for example, in the 90s and elsewhere. So. There's a lot here to study, and so I hope my talk today at least rose some interest among some of you, it's because I really do think that democracy is spreading. What was former Vice President Dan Cloke's famous words? The spread of democracy is inevitable, but that might change.